As you can see, if you've watched my other videos, I'm trying out a new camera angle here, so feel free to leave a comment on this video to let me know what you think, if this is a better camera angle, if you like it better, or if I should go back to using the other one. But this is coming up on Christmas season here, so working on some Christmas ornaments to get distributed to the local shop that I sell some stuff at. And this is a new design that I've not done before, so we'll kind of see together here how it goes. I've got some different aspects to it, or at least one. Kind of like Christmas ornaments as just a fun little project that I can usually get done in maybe 1 or 2 sittings, depending on how intricate the design is. But obviously they're by nature small items, so just not even as much room to work with as maybe a wedding plate or something like that. So this is a interesting part of it here as I get to the corner that has the hole for the loop, the strap to go through, that the hole is right in the middle of one of my chips, and it's a little bit of a distraction more than anything, where it doesn't really change anything about how I carve. I'm gonna do everything exactly the same as though that hole's not there. I just need to be aware of stuff like that where the wood behaves a little bit differently. Since there's no wood in the middle that I'm cutting, it just kind of breaks out as I get to that. But you can see it, for the most part, just kind of works out the same as any other chip. Not real happy about this cut coming toward my hand, but just being aware of that, making sure to not use much pressure. It helps that these are small chips, so the knife flows pretty easily without too much strain or force needed, but definitely something to be aware of on a section like that. Alright, so the next part here is a new thing that I'm going to try. I'm going to try to do this outer ring here as an old world style chip, just one solid facet. So for the outside portion here, as usual, this is going to be the deepest part. So just go ahead and use the knife in a nearly vertical manner here and try to follow that outer border as best I can. Making sure to get enough depth around here to have an interesting chip, but not so much that I'm either straining or gonna, I don't know, be too deep. I think old world style chips, as with the more traditional style chips, have kind of an ideal depth angle to them. So because this is a new I guess kind of chip that I'm gonna do it in 2 goes to try to not necessarily get it right off the bat. So I'm going to come inside my final line just to remove it and help me see what I'm doing on the final pass. And if you've seen my video on the knife that I use for old world style chips, you'll notice that this is not that I'm using my standard knife, and that's mostly because of the depth. The thickness of this chip is pretty narrow, so I have a little bit more angle to work with without worrying about having to get it too deep, which is the big problem with this knife. And also just the way that I use that knife in my hand is different, and I don't think that would be as conducive to this chip. So now I can kind of see a little bit better where the tip of the knife is to make sure I'm getting that proper. Come along and just shave off this smaller section that I left. I'm watching out for this as I transition from against the grain to along the grain and then to with the grain. Make sure I don't rip that out. So you can see a lot of it did not come out, and that's because I don't think I got the angle that I was looking for. I think it's a little steeper than I would ideally like, but I think it should still work and look just fine, especially for people who might see it and buy it aren't going to really know that it's different from what I was going for anyway, which is a nice part of chip carving when things don't go according to plan. You can usually make it look good anyway and no one knows the difference. There, I think that looks pretty good and should create a nice, interesting to the eye offset for the rosette that's inside there. And so the rest of this now is pretty standard chip carving stuff, pretty simple chips, pretty small, so I don't expect too much in the way of surprises at this point. I like to always make sure when I've got some kind of continuous border around a rosette like this that I do the border part first, because that way I know how far each of these individual pieces needs to come. If I do all of these individual pieces first and then try to match up the line along the outside, it might be uneven and have to wrestle with trying to match that up. So because this is all one continuous thing, I'll do that first, and then it's easier to make any adjustments if I didn't follow the pattern line exactly. So I do want to make sure I'm careful on this outer part not to go through that border. I want to make sure to leave this line right here continuous all the way around. If I get a little bit careless around this part right here, I can easily, either with the knife directly cut through that, or when I'm removing the chip I could pull a little bit of that wood fiber out. I don't want that. There's some definite patterns and tendencies that you can follow and be taught in chip carving, but as far as kind of grain direction and cut order, but I think a lot of it ends up coming from experience. You just kind of figure out how the wood behaves when you run into issues, what shapes of chips can cause a problem, that kind of thing. So that's why it's important to always be kind of aware of what you're doing and what the grain's doing. I think that last cut there went a little bit outside that line beyond where I wanted, so I'm gonna come back in and shorten that up, see if I can preserve that outline. Yeah, there's a little piece in there that I'll come back later and touch up to make sure I can remove the full chip without going through this border. So this one I'm going to have to adjust quite a bit. The point of this chip would like to be out here, but obviously that's outside the earlier borders. That's what I was talking about, of doing this part first. So now I can pretty easily make this adjustment to just bring that in a little bit tighter to line up there instead. So despite my best efforts, I like to do my patterns, create the patterns on the computer, and then apply them with the transfer tool to make sure that they're all nice and even and lined up perfectly. But at the end of it all, I still need to carve perfectly along all those lines to make it work like that, and sometimes I do better than others. Right, there's the outer section there, and then we've just got what really would be another 3-corner chip, but it's got this line that intersects it, which is not cut out, which means these ones are going to be 4-sided. And if at all possible, my goal is to make these little cuts here just a little bit curved. My intention being to make these small lines be part of a complete circle, so each one of these segments would be slightly curved. With them being as small as they are, it's going to be hard to see, but I think it'll make a difference to have them just curved that slight bit versus completely straight. And then to the last one, so these are all obviously very small chips, so I'll need to be careful on just generally carving, but also especially in the middle as they come together. Remember trying to get a little bit of curve on this short line there. I'm going to switch to my slightly more detail-oriented knife here, partly because I think the other one needs to be stropped, so rather than taking the time to do that right now, I'll just go to fresh knife. Because the inside of these triangular chips where they all come together is going to be particularly fragile, especially as more of them get carved. I like to carve from the inside out. That way they get released right away. The fragile part gets released while it's still supported by the rest of the chip behind it. If I start carving from the outside in, there's going to be some pressure and some forces as this moves, and it could cause the attached part to rip a little bit, as there's just not as much wood in there to really support it. So if I remove that first, I can avoid that. This one though, since it's almost along the grain, I really don't want to go that direction, because that's going to be against the grain, and the more against the grain but close to along the grain you go, the more challenge I typically find.